There's no such thing as a perfect product, and yet each has a story.
A phone.
Hi.
Hello.
I've seen companies pour countless resources with engineers and marketers working for months or even years in the pursuit of perfecting an idea, a solution to a need consumers have, or sometimes one they still won't understand until they hold it. Most of these products won't make a dent either because their timing wasn't right, or the market was flooded, or even because the technology was ahead of its time. But then there are the lucky few that do succeed, those that are so good that we choose to use them as daily drivers regardless of the sea of options we can choose from. The Galaxy S24 Ultra is one of them. As its successor is pretty much upon us, I've read your comments. I know a ton of you just want this phone at a discount right after. I'm Jaime Rivera, and for those of you fans of After the Buzz, welcome to my second episode of How It Started, How It's Going. I think the journey of the Ultra reminds me of that scene in The Dark Knight where the Joker says,
"See, I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve."
Remember how this was the spiritual successor to the Note? Yeah, that phone we all mocked at first because it was just too big, only for every competitor to have to follow suit a few years later. This whole idea of using a digital screen for artistic purposes, yeah, thank that device. Remember curved displays? Well, thank the Galaxy Note Edge. While you're at it, you can also thank the Galaxy Note 4 for pushing photography way before the Google Pixel was born. For a good part of 5 generations, the phone we called the monster was so ahead of the curve that everyone followed. Obviously, we all remember the aftermath of the Galaxy Note 7. It's admirable that the lineup somehow survived after 3 generations later, but once Samsung shifted to foldables and ultras, the writing was on the wall. It seriously made sense for the mantle of innovation to be consolidated into the Galaxy S Ultra, but actually that's when things shifted in the opposite direction. Ever notice how every single Galaxy Note looked different year over year? Yeah, it seems that drive ended with the Galaxy S22 Ultra because the biggest complaint I hear even today is that change went out the window. The Galaxy S24 Ultra is in many ways the same yet different, so I'll admit I found myself mixed with this design. I really did love its almost Lumia-like squared edges and how these contoured around the borders. Visually, there was just no way to not love everything about it. My problem was really in the feel. Listen, you don't need to sell me on titanium being a better material than aluminum, but this is one road I wish Samsung would have left Apple alone on. It didn't really make the phone any lighter, where Apple was struggling with how heavy its stainless steel was. Seriously, all it did was make the corners so sharp that I had to get a case about a week later. As a result, well, it did age like fine wine. I mean, I actually recommend Samsung's new vegan leather cases, as these have aged far better than even the regular ones used to. It brought no scratches to the finish anywhere, and sure, I did hear complaints about the oleophobic coating on this phone. Mine aged okay, definitely not as bad as the stories I heard, but not better than others 1 year later. Actually, most of the elements that made this display unique are still worth considering. This anti-reflective coating came crazy handy during my commutes to the city and augmented the experience of the always-on functionality. Its display also remains one of the best in the industry, but I wouldn't necessarily call it class-leading anymore. Samsung continues to be the king of OLED displays, but oddly more affordable devices like the OnePlus 13 or last year's OnePlus 12 were capable of higher brightness, even in typical situations. This being said, it remains my favorite given its S Pen support, and sure, its boxier design along with its speakers make content consumption feel more natural.
Morning. Another day. Another real one.
Now, this whole S Pen experience is really what keeps me coming back. At this point, I know it's just nice to have for most of you, but I literally use it every day. It turns this into my little pocket notepad, which I pretty much grew up with. It's how I sign documents on the go, as you really can't beat the Sharpie feel provided by the tip on the glass. It helps me highlight my scripts to spare me the need to create a separate shot list. Like seriously, I'll admit I never really cared about much of the rest of the features, and about the only time I used the Bluetooth functionality for the shutter was back in the days of the Galaxy Note 9. Still, if you care about it, this might just be the last phone to bring that along, so yeah, prepare for that part. But then software is one of those things I do prefer from Samsung devices. I'll admit I did struggle with most competitors launching their version of Android 15 at least a month before Samsung. It's not the way things played last year, but regardless, One UI 7 is here, and I think for the better. I've been a huge fan of the Now bar on the lock screen because seriously, uniformity in the placement of contextual controls now also reaches ergonomics. Sure, I know in essence this is like the dynamic island, and I also know that the new approach to widgets here is iOS in every way, but let's be real, Apple copies the good ideas too. Galaxy AI features are now more integrated into the OS itself and not a separate application you sometimes have to launch, or elements that mostly depend on the keyboard, which by the way I disable on day one because I really don't like its multilingual support. That said though, I can't really tell you that I use Galaxy AI more because of this, but it's a step in the right direction in my opinion. And then there are things like what reminds me of a blend of Oxygen OS and iOS, like being able to make your folders bigger or swiping from the right for quick settings and then from the left for notifications. The cool part though is that this is Android and that's all optional, so if you don't like it, just don't use it. I am still a fan of essentials, like the edge menus for quick shortcuts and just how speedy interactions feel all around, even with how thick the skin is over the typical Android experience. Now, most of it has to do with just how well the spec sheet aged. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 has been great for day-to-day performance, and even if I tested the base model at 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, I can't really say that I fell short in any way. This phone still has most of the latest connectivity, which I will admit did prove itself. I tested phone calls and data connectivity across multiple countries, and I'd say I trust this device more than any other at clinging onto data or phone calls. Endurance was then just a breeze, and that's considering that this is no longer the battery champ, but this is where things in this story start getting mixed for me. Sure, this phone is great, but even at its ultra size, it's crazy to think that the OnePlus 13 has nearly 20% more battery on a thinner and lighter body, along with much faster charging. This is one of those moments where I start debating the premise of having such a big phone for less. And then that leads me to the topic of these cameras. See, by definition, the word ultra means extremist, but that hasn't really been this phone for at least 2 generations. Any other competitor using the word is already giving us 1-inch sensors and simply dwarfing what this phone can do by comparison. About the only reason I can praise Samsung for this approach is because you get all these cameras without feeling like if there's a second phone on the camera bump. Obviously, the photos are what matters, and that's where I feel Samsung has done a ton of improvements in its processing. Year over year, we see less saturation and more character in the color science. Not as contrasty as a Pixel, not as eye-catchy as an iPhone. It's just the right balance in between where colors aren't subtle, but they aren't overdone either. This phone is then the king of focal lengths, at least in the United States, and boy can I tell the processing has improved. Even last year's Galaxy S23 Ultra would fall apart pretty easily the further you went with the zoom, but not this phone. Maybe the biggest improvement I saw was in low light. Galaxies have always struggled with shutter lag in dark conditions, but this phone addressed it really well. As a result, moving subjects were taken care of just as well or better than competitors, and what I do like the most is that it also meant the sky and other highlights weren't overdone. I do think portraits and selfies got some improvements in character, and last but not least, there's video, which I feel did find good improvements in low light performance and just the overall codec being used. I find it closer to iPhone level more than ever before, but not quite yet. HDR here is pretty great, but there are subtleties where I still don't trust it. Same thing with the selfie video performance, which was better than most in a lot of elements, but again, not the quality I feel I can leave my iPhone at home for just yet, and I seriously think this is an Android problem because I know OEMs are trying hard. To conclude, let's go back to the way I started this video. It almost feels like a contradiction to consider this the most conservative Ultra ever. Those two words should not live together. You're either an extreme or you're not. And this Galaxy S24 Ultra is not. Sure, it follows on a beautiful formula with one of the best designs I've seen in years. It makes me not blame Samsung for keeping this design language as long as possible, but then I personally feel it breaks the expectation it creates with its own name. This Galaxy S24 Ultra Ultra is a great phone in so many ways, but can we really call it that extreme bit of innovation that once gave it its name? I'd say no. It's not the most ultra camera, nor the most ultra display, nor the most ultra battery life, nor the most ultra anything. I'd say the Galaxy S24 Pro would be a better name because surely it does offer elements that go beyond what its siblings can do, but then at a whopping $1299, I will admit that I struggle with telling you that this is the best phone at this price range or even lower. All this being said though, to be fair, you gotta hand it to Samsung for both the trading deals and just how well the company can sweeten the pot throughout the year with discounts. Right now, sure, there is no phone in the United States with these capabilities at that price. So, how it started? I'd say okay, kind of expensive and not necessarily ultra by comparison. How it's going? Well, with those deals and how the rumors of the Galaxy S25 Ultra don't necessarily amount to something that's that much better, well, I'd say pretty good. If you're in the market for the best flat slab Samsung phone money can buy right now, this is pretty much it, and probably even after the Galaxy Unpacked. Just remember, it's a great phone, but not the extremist it used to be. That legacy left with the Galaxy Note. Let me know if you agree with my assessment in the comments down below, and while you're at it, a like and subscribe would be highly appreciated. Also, follow me on social media for more of a behind-the-scenes look at how I test these phones and so many other products on a day-to-day. I'm Jaime Rivera. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.